The streets were quiet, too quiet for a colony that once held thousands of lives. Buildings stood broken, their walls blackened with fire and smoke. Doors were ripped open, glass shattered, and strange markings covered the stone. The air smelled of dust and metal, and every sound echoed as if the ruins themselves were alive. The human walked slowly, his boots crunching on scattered pieces of glass. His name was Daniel, a traveler who had seen war on more than one world. Yet the silence here felt different. It was not the silence of peace, but of something stolen, something left unfinished. He paused at an empty fountain in the center of the square. The water had long dried, leaving cracks across its surface. A child's toy floated in a shallow puddle at the bottom, a small carved figure with broken arms. Daniel bent down, lifted it gently, and turned it in his hand. For a moment he wondered if the child who once owned it had survived, but deep down, he already knew the answer. A faint sound reached him. It was soft, almost lost in the wind. At first he thought it was nothing, just metal creaking in the distance. But then it came again, a tiny muffled sob. His body froze. The sound did not belong to machines or wind. It belonged to someone alive. Daniel's heart began to pound. He looked around carefully, scanning the shadows of broken homes. His instincts, sharpened by years of survival, warned him to stay quiet. Whoever made that sound might not be safe. Or worse, it could be bait set by raiders. Yet he could not ignore it. He stepped carefully into a narrow street. The houses leaned against each other like tired old men, their windows broken, doors hanging loose. A trail of small footprints in the dust led deeper inside. They were light, too small for any soldier or raider. Daniel followed them, his hand tightening on the metal rod he carried for defense. The sobs grew clearer. He turned a corner and stopped. There, in the shadow of a collapsed doorway, sat a small figure. Her knees were pulled tightly against her chest, arms wrapped around them as if to make herself disappear. She had dark silver skin that shimmered faintly in the pale light, and her hair was tangled with dust and ash. She was shaking, not from the cold but from fear. Daniel stepped closer. The girl raised her head, her large eyes glowing faintly like stars. They were filled with terror, yet also with something else, a desperate hope. She looked at him as if he were the first living soul she had seen in forever. "Hey," Daniel said softly, lowering his voice so it would not scare her. "It's all right, I won't hurt you." The girl didn't answer. Her lips trembled, and for a moment she pressed herself tighter into the wall, as if she expected him to vanish or strike her. Daniel kept his distance, crouching low to appear smaller, less threatening. "You're not safe here," he continued, his tone calm but firm. "Bad people may come back. You need to move." The girl blinked, her breath shaky. Then she whispered something so soft he almost missed it. One word, broken but clear. "Dad." Daniel felt the world stop around him. His breath caught in his throat. He thought he had misheard, but the look in her eyes confirmed it. She had spoken to him, not as a stranger, not as a rescuer, but as something far deeper. He shook his head lightly, trying to understand. "No, I'm not your father," he said, his voice uneven. But the girl only stared at him with a fragile hope, as if she had chosen him in that moment, as if calling him that word gave her a reason to keep breathing. Daniel's chest tightened. He had been many things in life: a fighter, a survivor, a wanderer, but never a father. Yet standing in those broken streets with that small, trembling figure looking at him, he felt a new weight settle into his soul. The silence of the colony was no longer just ruins and echoes. It had given him a cry for help. It had given him a responsibility he could not walk away from. Daniel slowly extended his hand toward her. "If you want me to be Dad," he whispered, his voice steady now, "then I'll protect you, no matter what." The girl's small fingers hesitated, then reached out and touched his palm. Her hand was cold, fragile like glass, yet filled with trust. For the first time in years, Daniel felt his heart change. The streets were still silent, the world still broken, but something new had begun. A father had been born. Daniel stood frozen, in the ruins, the small alien girl's word echoing in his mind. Dad. It was not just a word, it was a choice, a plea, and a bond forged in a heartbeat. He had walked through broken worlds before, seen orphans and survivors, but no one had ever looked at him with such raw hope. Her fingers still rested in his hand, trembling yet refusing to let go. He could have pulled away. He could have walked back into the silent streets. But something deep inside told him that leaving her now would break more than just her heart. It would break something within himself. The girl's eyes shimmered faintly in the half-light, reflecting fire-damaged walls and the emptiness around them. She was young, no more than 7 or 8 in human years. Her skin carried thin patterns like silver veins that glowed when she breathed, and her hair, though messy, seemed to catch even the faintest light. She was alien, yet so painfully familiar, in the way her tears left marks on her cheeks. Daniel knelt down, speaking carefully. "What's your name?" The girl's lips moved, but no sound came. She swallowed, then whispered something broken. It was not a word he could understand, but it carried a sound of loss, like a name spoken too many times in grief. She shook her head quickly, as if words were too heavy for her. "All right," Daniel said gently. "We'll figure it out later, but first we need to leave this place." He lifted his head, scanning the broken streets. The silence had grown heavier, as if the shadows themselves were listening. His instincts warned him. Raiders, scavengers, or worse, they might still be nearby, and if they heard a child's cry, they would come. The girl tugged his hand. "Dad," she whispered again, this time with more strength, as if saying it gave her courage. Daniel felt a strange fire inside his chest. He had lived years without family, moving from one battle to another, never staying long enough to build ties. Yet now, in the ruins of an alien colony, a child had chosen him, not because he deserved it, not because he asked for it, but because she had no one else. He tightened his grip on her hand. "Stay close," he said firmly. "Don't let go." They began moving down the narrow street, stepping over broken doors and shattered glass. Every sound seemed louder now. The scrape of his boots, the distant hum of wind against metal beams, the faint crack of rubble shifting. The girl kept looking around nervously, her free hand clutching the fabric of his coat. Daniel noticed she limped slightly. Her ankle was bruised, perhaps from running or falling. He slowed his pace, adjusting so she could keep up. He wanted to carry her, but his hands needed to stay free in case danger came. Still, every time she stumbled, his arm shot out to steady her. They reached a wide street lined with abandoned market stalls. Fruits long rotted lay scattered across the ground. Their scent faded to nothing. Signs written in alien script swung weakly in the wind. It felt like a ghost city, the memory of life without the warmth of living souls. Daniel stopped suddenly, raising his hand. The girl froze beside him. He had heard something. A metallic clink, faint but clear. He crouched low, pulling the girl with him behind an overturned stall. Voices carried across the empty square. Harsh, low, unfriendly. Raiders. 3 figures appeared at the far end, dragging sacks of stolen goods. They laughed quietly, their weapons slung across their shoulders. Daniel's heart raced. If they saw him with the child, they would not hesitate. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling the girl to stay silent. She nodded, her wide eyes locked on him. The raiders passed slowly, their boots crunching over the broken road. Daniel held his breath, every muscle tense. The girl's small hand tightened painfully around his, but she did not make a sound. For a moment, Daniel felt proud. She trusted him, even in fear. When the raiders finally disappeared down another street, Daniel exhaled. He waited a few more seconds, then pulled the girl out of hiding. "We can't stay here," he whispered. "It's not safe." The girl nodded quickly, Her face was pale, but her grip on his hand had grown stronger, as if danger only made her trust him more. They kept moving, avoiding the main streets, slipping through broken alleys and narrow passages. Daniel guided her carefully, keeping his ears sharp for every sound. He knew they needed food, water, and a safe place to rest, but above all they needed to survive the night. At one point the girl tugged his coat and pointed. On the ground lay a small cloth doll, torn and dirty. She reached for it, but Daniel shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "We can't carry extra weight. We move faster without it." The girl's eyes filled with tears. Daniel hesitated, then sighed, and picked up the doll. He handed it to her without another word. She hugged it tightly, pressing her face into the fabric. Daniel realized then that survival was not only about food and weapons. For her, hope mattered more. Something to hold, something to remind her that she was not alone. As the stars began to appear above the broken colony, Daniel looked at the girl and felt the weight of her word again. Dad. He had not asked for it, but he could not reject it. Somewhere deep inside he already knew. This was not the end of his journey. It was the beginning. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt a purpose stronger than his own survival. The night air grew colder as Daniel led the girl through the ruined alleys. Shadows stretched across the cracked walls, and the wind carried whispers that made the streets feel alive. The girl clung tightly to his side, her small steps quickening whenever she heard a sound. Her doll was pressed to her chest as if it were the last piece of her old world she could hold on to. Daniel knew they could not keep wandering. Raiders were close and the ruins were not safe. He needed to find a way out of the colony before the patrols tightened their grip. His eyes scanned every broken path, every collapsed structure, searching for something that offered a chance of escape. "Stay close," he whispered again, though she had not let go of his hand even once. They reached the edge of the marketplace where a wide street opened into what had once been the transport district. Rusted vehicles lay overturned, their metal frames broken like skeletons of some forgotten beast. The lights from old towers flickered faintly, running on the last sparks of failing power. Daniel crouched low, studying the road ahead. In the distance, he saw movement, 2 raiders walking slowly, their rifles slung across their shoulders. They stopped now and then, checking the shadows with sharp eyes. A direct path through would be suicide. He turned to the girl. "We can't go that way," he murmured. She nodded quickly, her trust unshaken. Daniel's chest tightened at that simple faith. He was a stranger, yet she looked at him as if he was her only world. Searching the nearby walls, he spotted a gap between 2 broken buildings. Narrow, half hidden under debris, but passable. It might lead to the service tunnels that ran under the colony. Dangerous, yes, but less exposed than the open streets. "This way," Daniel whispered, pulling her gently toward the gap. They slipped into the passage, the air inside damp and cold. Dust clung to the walls and faint dripping echoed ahead. The girl's small fingers dug into his hand, but she followed without complaint. They moved carefully, stepping over broken pipes and shattered tiles. The tunnel twisted and narrowed, forcing them to crouch at times. Daniel could hear the girl's breathing grow faster. She was tired, scared, and hungry, but she pushed forward, her eyes locked on his back. He slowed his pace, not wanting to lose her in the darkness. Suddenly, a sharp clang rang out. Daniel froze. The girl had kicked a loose piece of metal. The sound bounced off the walls, echoing like a bell. Daniel's heart sank. From above came the muffled voices of raiders, boots pounded against the street they had heard. "Move," Daniel urged, his voice low but firm. He pulled the girl forward, faster now. The tunnel shook with the sound of footsteps above. Shouts followed, and then the metallic scrape of weapons being drawn. The girl stumbled, her doll slipping from her arms. She gasped and bent to grab it, but Daniel scooped her up without slowing. "Forget it," he hissed, though he saw the pain in her eyes. She clutched his neck tightly, her face buried against his shoulder. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber filled with rusted machinery. Broken cables hung from the ceiling, sparking faintly. Daniel's boots splashed into shallow water as he carried the girl across. Behind them, the sound of raiders grew louder. They had found the entrance. Daniel set the girl down gently. "Run," he ordered. "Stay with me and don't stop." Her legs trembled, but she nodded. Together they dashed through the chamber, weaving between machines. A gunshot rang out, the bullet striking sparks from a nearby pipe. The girl screamed but kept running, her trust stronger than her fear. Daniel grabbed a loose pipe from the floor and hurled it at the nearest raider as he appeared in the doorway. The metal struck the man's shoulder, forcing him to stumble. Daniel took the chance to push the girl through another exit at the far end. The tunnel beyond was steeper, sloping downward into deeper shadows. They slid down together, gravel scraping under their boots. Another gunshot rang out, but the darkness swallowed them before the raiders could aim again. At the bottom, the tunnel leveled into a small underground corridor. The air smelled of rust and old oil. Daniel stopped to catch his breath, his chest heaving. The girl pressed close to him, her eyes wide with terror. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're safe," he said, though his heart was still racing. "I won't let them take you." The girl lifted her head slowly. Her lips trembled. Then she whispered the word again. "Dad." It struck Daniel harder than the gunshots. Her trust was not born from safety, but from choice. She had decided he was her protector, her family, even in the face of death. Daniel looked into her glowing eyes and felt the weight of that bond. He was not just running for himself anymore. He was running for her future. He tightened his grip on her hand once more. "Then I'll be Dad," he said firmly. "And Dad doesn't run forever. One day we fight back." The girl nodded, her tears mixing with a faint smile. In that dark tunnel, surrounded by fear, Daniel realized their escape was only the beginning. The real journey, the dangerous one, had just started. The tunnel stretched into blackness, its walls damp and rough, the air heavy with rust and decay. Daniel kept moving forward with the girl beside him, her small hand locked tightly in his. Behind them, faint voices echoed. The raiders were not giving up. Their footsteps grew louder, bouncing off the stone like a drumbeat of danger. Daniel slowed for a moment, crouching low to study the shadows. The path split ahead. One tunnel sloped downward, narrow and wet, while another curved upward into thicker darkness. He weighed the risk quickly. Downward might lead to flooded shafts, upward could lead back to the surface and straight into enemy hands. He had no map, no guide, only instinct. The girl tugged his sleeve. Her eyes glowed faintly, catching light even where none seemed to exist. She pointed to the upward path. "Safe," she whispered, her voice soft but certain. Daniel hesitated. Could she sense something he could not? He had no time to question. The raiders' voices grew sharper, closer. Trusting her instinct, he nodded and pulled her into the upper tunnel. They ran, their steps splashing through shallow puddles. The walls grew tighter, forcing Daniel to duck his head. Behind them came the sound of boots pounding, then the flash of light. The raiders had torches. The glow chased them like fire through the dark. "Faster," Daniel urged, lifting the girl when she stumbled. She wrapped her arms around his neck, clinging as he carried her forward. Her small frame weighed little, but every step burned his muscles. He could not stop. He would not stop. A gunshot cracked through the tunnel. The bullet sparked against the wall, sending shards of stone raining down. The girl gasped, burying her face against Daniel's chest. He pressed forward, his teeth clenched. Another shot followed, missing by inches. The raiders shouted, their voices thick with hunger for blood. Daniel turned sharply into a side passage, hoping to lose them in the maze. The tunnel grew steeper, forcing him to slide on loose gravel. The girl cried out softly, but Daniel shielded her as best he could, his arms tightening around her fragile body. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a massive chamber. Broken machinery filled the space, long abandoned, their shapes twisted, like skeletons of forgotten giants. Faint blue light seeped from cracks in the ceiling, painting the room in ghostly colors. Daniel set the girl down gently. Stay close, he whispered. His eyes darted around the chamber, too open, too exposed. He needed cover. The girl clutched his coat, her small fingers trembling. Dad, she whispered again, and though her voice shook, her eyes held something stronger. Trust. Daniel's chest tightened. He crouched low behind a fallen metal beam, pulling her with him. The raiders entered the chamber moments later, their torches cutting through the gloom. Shadows stretched across the walls as they spread out, weapons raised. Find them. One snarled. His voice carried like a blade. Daniel's heart pounded. He knew he could not outrun them forever. He had no rifle, no blade sharp enough, only a scavenged pipe strapped to his side. But he had something the raiders did not, a reason to fight. The girl pressed against him, her breath quick and shallow. He placed a finger to her lips. Quiet, he whispered. She nodded, silent as stone. The raiders drew closer, their boots echoing. Daniel's grip tightened on the pipe. He waited, breath steady, eyes sharp. The first raider passed near, his torchlight sweeping across the beam. Daniel struck fast, swinging the pipe into the man's knee. A crack echoed. The raider screamed and collapsed. The others shouted, turning their lights toward the noise. Daniel grabbed the girl and dashed for another tunnel on the far side. Bullets sparked behind him, ricocheting off the walls. Go, go, he urged, pushing her forward. She ran, her small legs pumping with surprising strength, her doll still clutched tight in one hand. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to crawl through rubble. Daniel shoved broken stones aside, his hands bleeding, every second feeling like an hour. The girl squeezed through first, her glowing eyes guiding the way. He followed, his back scraping against jagged rock. The gunfire faded, but the shouts still echoed. The raiders were trapped behind the rubble for now, but it would not hold them long. At last they stumbled into another corridor. The air here was fresher, carrying a faint breeze. Daniel stopped, catching his breath. His hands shook, his chest burned, but he managed a faint smile as he looked at the girl. You did well, he said softly. She blinked up at him, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears, and whispered the word that had bound them together. Dad. Daniel felt the weight of the chase lift slightly. He was tired, bleeding, and hunted, but hearing that word gave him strength no weapon could match. He picked her up once more, cradling her close. We're not done yet, he murmured, but as long as I'm here, nothing will take you from me. The tunnel ahead glowed faintly with light. Perhaps it led to the surface, perhaps to more danger. But Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. No matter what waited, he would face it. Not for himself, but for the little girl who had chosen him in the dark. The tunnel finally opened into the pale light of dawn. Daniel squinted as he stepped out, carrying the girl in his arms. Behind them, the ruins still slept under smoke and silence. Ahead stretched rocky hills and broken plains. The air was sharp and cold, but it carried something different. Freedom. The girl buried her face in his chest, whispering softly, Dad. The word was no longer fragile. It carried strength, a trust that rooted itself deeper with every step. Daniel held her tighter, scanning the horizon. He knew they could not wander endlessly. She needed food, water, warmth, and safety. He remembered whispers from traders, a small human outpost on the edge of this region, hidden among the cliffs. If it still stood, it was their only hope. Adjusting his grip, he began the long climb. Hours passed. The sun rose high, burning through thin clouds. Daniel's muscles ached, but he did not slow. The girl rested against him, drifting in and out of sleep, her hand clutching the torn doll he had once told her to leave behind. He smiled faintly at the thought. That doll had given her strength, and now, in some way, it gave him strength too. Last jagged walls of stone rose before him. Hidden between them was a metal gate, half camouflaged with rock. Antennas stretched upward, their tips glinting in the light. Daniel's heart lifted. The outpost was real. He approached slowly. Before he could speak, a voice called out from above. Stop right there. Daniel froze. On the ridge, 2 human soldiers stood, rifles aimed directly at him. Their armor was old but well kept, their faces hard with suspicion. Identify yourself, one barked. My name's Daniel, he shouted back, keeping his voice steady. I'm human, a traveler. I need shelter. The soldiers exchanged quick glances. Then one frowned, pointing his rifle lower. What's that you're carrying? Daniel hesitated, shifting the girl slightly so they could see. Her silver skin caught the sunlight, her glowing eyes half hidden behind messy hair. She's a child, Daniel said firmly. She's with me. The soldiers' faces hardened further. One spat on the ground. Alien, he muttered with disgust. She's just a kid, Daniel snapped. His voice was sharper now, his protective instinct rising. She has no one. She called me Dad, that makes her mine. The soldiers looked uncertain. After a long pause, one finally gestured toward the gate. Bring them in. But the commander will decide. The heavy metal doors creaked open. Inside lay a small camp, rows of makeshift shelters, a few towers, and the faint smell of cooking fires. Men and women moved between stations, carrying supplies, repairing old weapons, or training in the dust. Every eye turned as Daniel entered with the girl in his arms. Whispers spread quickly. Some faces showed pity, others distrust, and more than a few showed anger. A tall man with gray hair and a scar across his cheek stepped forward. His uniform marked him as the commander. His eyes narrowed as he studied the child. What have you brought into my camp, Daniel? Daniel straightened, his shoulders. A survivor, he said firmly. A child who lost everything. She's under my protection. The commander's gaze was cold. That's not a child. That's a liability. You want to bring trouble to my people? Raiders follow her kind. Disease follows her kind. Distrust follows her kind. The girl pressed closer against Daniel's chest, her small body trembling. He felt her tears soak into his shirt, his jaw clenched. She's not trouble, he growled. She's my daughter now, and I won't let anyone touch her. Murmurs rose around them. Some soldiers nodded quietly, moved by his words. Others shook their heads, muttering about danger and risk. The commander's face did not soften. You can stay, he said finally. But the child does not belong here. She will eat our food, drain our water, and put us at risk. Think carefully, Daniel. Will you choose us or her? The camp grew silent, waiting for his answer. Daniel looked down at the girl, her glowing eyes met his wide with fear but holding that same fragile trust. The same word trembled on her lips. Dad. He lifted his head, voice strong and unshaken. I choose her. Wherever I go, she goes. If that means leaving, then I'll walk back into the wasteland before I abandon her. The silence deepened. The commander studied him, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Finally, he gave a slow nod. Very well, you can stay. But if she brings danger here, it will be your responsibility. Daniel's grip on the girl tightened. It already is. The soldiers lowered their rifles. The whispers faded. The girl rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, her tears quieting. For the first time, she felt safe, even among strangers. Daniel knew this was only the beginning of the trials to come. But as he looked around the camp, holding the child close, he also knew one truth. He would fight anyone, even his own kind, if it meant protecting her. Because from the moment she called him Dad, his life was no longer his own. The outpost walls offered safety from the outside, but inside Daniel felt the weight of watching eyes. Every step he took with the girl at his side drew whispers. Men and women turned away, muttering under their breath. Children hid behind their parents, staring at her glowing eyes with fear. Daniel ignored them. He kept walking, his arm around, her small shoulders guiding her to the shelter they had been given, a narrow tent near the edge of the camp. It was more of a warning than a welcome, as if the commander wanted to keep them close enough to control but far enough to stay apart. The girl sat quietly on the cot inside, clutching her doll. She looked around the tent as if it were a cage. Daniel crouched in front of her, brushing dust from her tangled hair. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe here." But even as he spoke, he doubted his own words. Safety here depended not on walls but on trust, and trust was something this camp refused to give. That night, Daniel overheard soldiers outside. "She doesn't belong here. She'll bring trouble. You saw what her kind did. He's blinded, calls her his daughter, ridiculous." The girl must have heard too. She pressed her face into his chest, her small body shaking. "They don't want me," she whispered. Daniel held her tight. "They don't decide," he said firmly. "I decide. And I want you." The next morning, the commander summoned him. Daniel entered the council tent with the girl in his arms. Inside sat 5 leaders, hardened survivors, their faces marked by years of loss, their eyes fixed not on him but on the child. "She cannot stay," one said coldly. "We've lost too much to her kind. You ask us to open our gates to danger." "She's just a child," Daniel shot back. "She hasn't hurt anyone. She's starving, broken, and scared. If we turn her away, we're no better than the raiders outside." Another council member leaned forward. "And what if she leads them here? What if she carries sickness we can't cure? Will you gamble our lives for your sentiment?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm not gambling. I'm protecting her. That's what humans do. That's what makes us different." The commander studied him quietly, then spoke. "We'll give you one chance, Daniel. Prove she belongs here. Prove she is worth our trust. If you fail, you both leave." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then give me the trial." It began the very next day. At dawn, Daniel was ordered to join the patrol. Raiders had been sighted near the valley. The soldiers whispered that the commander wanted to test if he would fight with the same fire while guarding the girl. Daniel left her in the care of a kind old medic, the only one who had smiled at her. She clung to his hand before he left, whispering, "Dad," as if the word itself was a shield. The patrol moved fast, their eyes sharp, their rifles ready. Daniel stayed at the front, his senses alert. When the raiders struck, it was sudden. A burst of gunfire from the rocks. Bullets tore through the dust. Soldiers scattered for cover. Daniel charged forward without hesitation. He fought with the desperation of a man who had something precious to protect. His pipe cracked against a raider's weapon. His fists struck with fury. He drove them back, refusing to fall, refusing to fail. By the time the fight ended, 3 raiders lay unconscious and the others had fled. The soldiers stared at him in silence. One muttered almost grudgingly, "He fights harder than any of us." When Daniel returned, the girl ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. The medic smiled faintly. "She wouldn't stop asking if you'd come back." That evening, Daniel faced the council again. He stood straight, the girl holding his hand. "I did what you asked. I fought for this camp, the same as any of you. But I'll tell you this, I didn't fight for walls or supplies or command. I fought because she called me Dad. And that's enough." The council murmured among themselves. Some faces softened, some remained cold. Finally, the commander spoke. "You've shown courage, but courage is not trust. This will take time. For now, you stay. But know this, Daniel. One mistake, and both of you walk out those gates." Daniel's eyes burned, but he held his voice steady. "One mistake doesn't scare me. Losing her does." He walked out with the girl in his arms. She looked up, at him, her smile faint but real. "They'll never take me?" she asked. "Never," Daniel said firmly. "Not while I breathe." That night, under the stars above the outpost, Daniel realized the truth. This was not just her trial. It was his too, to prove that a bond born in silence and fear could stand against suspicion, hatred, and doubt. And he would not fail. Days passed in the outpost, but trust did not come easily. Wherever Daniel and the girl went, eyes followed. Some softened when they saw how she clung to him, whispering "Dad" with every step, but others grew colder, whispering about danger and betrayal. Daniel endured it all. He worked harder than anyone else, hauling supplies, fixing broken machines, standing guard at the walls. But nothing silenced the doubts. At night he told the girl stories by the fire, stories of stars and oceans, of worlds where children laughed without fear. She listened with wide eyes, her doll pressed to her chest, her glowing gaze filled with hope only he could give her. But one night, the true test came. The alarm bells rang across the outpost, sharp and urgent. Raiders had returned, not in small numbers this time, but in a swarm. Shadows moved across the valley, torches blazing, weapons flashing. Their shouts rose like thunder. The camp erupted in chaos. Soldiers scrambled to the walls, children screamed, fires were lit to mark the defenses. Daniel grabbed his rifle, his heart pounding. But when he turned, he saw the girl standing in the tent doorway, clutching her doll, fear flooding her glowing eyes. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. He knelt quickly, placing both hands on her shoulders. "Stay with the medic. Stay inside. I'll come back." She shook her head, her tears spilling. "They'll take me." Daniel's chest tightened. He pressed his forehead to hers. "Not while I live. Do you hear me? I'll fight for you. Always." She nodded weakly, holding onto his sleeve before letting go. He turned and ran to the walls, his blood burning with fire. The raiders struck hard. Gunfire cracked, arrows whistled, explosions tore through the dust. Men fell, women screamed, the outpost shook. Daniel fought at the front line, his rifle roaring, his blade flashing. He cut down raider after raider, his fury unmatched. Around him, soldiers stared in awe. The man they had doubted now stood like a wall of iron. But then came the breach. A section of the wall crumbled under explosives. Raiders poured in, their shouts filling the camp. Daniel spun, horror striking him. The breach was close to the medic's tent. Close to her, he sprinted, ignoring the bullets, ignoring the pain in his legs. He crashed through the smoke just as raiders stormed into the tent. The girl screamed, clutching her doll, backing into the corner. "Dad!" Daniel's roar split the air. He slammed into the first raider, breaking his weapon in half. He struck the second with his blade, knocking him cold. Blood filled his mouth, pain ripped through his side, but he stood tall, shielding her with his body. More raiders rushed in. He spread his arms wide. "You'll take her over my dead body." The girl's small hands grabbed his sleeve, her voice breaking. "Don't leave me." "I won't," Daniel growled, his breath ragged. "I swear it." The raiders hesitated. In his eyes they saw no fear, only fire. The fire of a man who would die before surrendering. They charged, but before they reached him, the commander and soldiers stormed in behind, guns blazing. The raiders fell one by one until silence claimed the tent once more. Daniel collapsed to his knees, gasping. The girl rushed into his arms, sobbing. He held her tight, his voice rough but steady. "You're safe. I told you I'd come back." When the battle ended, the camp lay scarred but standing. Fires smoldered, wounded were carried, but the raiders were gone. And at the center of it all was Daniel, bloodied and broken, holding the child who had called him Dad. The commander approached, his face grim. For a long moment he stared at Daniel and the girl. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with respect. "You proved it tonight. She's not a burden. She's hope. And you reminded us what humanity means." The camp fell silent. One by one, soldiers lowered their heads, no longer in distrust but in recognition. Daniel stood slowly, lifting the girl in his arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, her whisper soft but strong. "Dad." His eyes burned as he looked at the others. "This is what makes us different," he said firmly. "Not our weapons, not our walls, but this, the choice to protect, to love, to stand when no one else will." The commander nodded, his voice low. Humanity's heart, revealed. That night, under a sky filled with wounded stars, Daniel sat by the fire with the girl asleep, in his arms. He was no longer just a wanderer, no longer just a survivor. He was a father, and in that role, he had found something greater than himself. A reason worth fighting for, a reason worth living for. Because when she had looked at him and said that single word, everything had changed. Forever.